What would you do if you were given a chance to win millions, but at the cost of your life? Welcome to the Marionette Trials, a deadly game where every choice is a trap and every mistake is fatal. Contestants are lured in by desperation, forced to play twisted, nightmarish challenges, and controlled by unseen puppet masters. But there can only be one survivor, and the price of victory is far worse than death. Prepare yourself for a dark, disturbing journey into fear, control, and unimaginable horror. This is not just a game, this is survival at its most terrifying. Watch the Marionette Trials now, and step into a world where you are nothing more than a puppet on a string. No one knew where the invitations came from. They arrived in plain black envelopes, slipped under apartment doors or left on train seats, always with the same message. For those in need, a chance to change your fate. $10 million. One winner. Play at your own risk. No return address, no sender. Just a time and a place. Ethan Park was down to his last $50. His debts loomed like a noose. His landlord's patience had run dry, and his desperation outweighed his fear. When he saw the envelope on his doorstep, he hesitated only for a moment before ripping it open. The instructions were simple. Arrive at an abandoned slaughterhouse on the city's outskirts at midnight. No phones, no identification, no questions. Ethan expected maybe a dozen other contestants when he arrived. Instead, there were over 100. Men, women, even a few teenagers, all standing in the cold, their breath misting in the air. The atmosphere was suffocating. People whispered anxiously, some trying to joke, others clutching their arms as if bracing for something worse than the freezing wind. Then the lights flickered on. Steel doors groaned as they slid open, revealing a group of figures in featureless white masks and black surgical gowns. They moved in eerie unison, stepping forward without a word. A voice crackled through unseen speakers, deep and distorted. Welcome, participants. The games will begin shortly. Please step inside. No one moved at first. Then, a man scoffed and turned away. Screw this, he muttered, making for the exit. A sharp click rang out. The man froze, a dark stain blooming on his chest. A suppressed gunshot. He collapsed, gurgling, his eyes rolling back as blood pooled around his twitching fingers. Panic erupted. People screamed, stumbled back. Some tried to run. More gunshots. Bodies hit the pavement like discarded dolls. The masked figures stood motionless, their weapons still smoking. Step inside, the voice repeated, or be eliminated. Ethan's stomach twisted as he stumbled forward, driven by terror more than choice. One by one, the survivors shuffled through the doors, past the cooling corpses of those who had refused. Inside, the slaughterhouse smelled of rust and decay. The walls were lined with old meat hooks, some still swaying from unseen disturbances. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting everything in a sickly green glow. Another masked figure approached, holding a tray of syringes filled with a thick black liquid. For identification, the voice instructed. Refuse, and you forfeit your place. Ethan watched as a young woman in front of him hesitated. She barely had time to scream before a blade slashed across her throat, her blood splattering across the cold concrete. Hands shaking, he took the syringe. The needle pricked his skin. Darkness swallowed him whole. He awoke in a white room, his clothes replaced by a numbered jumpsuit. Cameras blinked in the corners. A speaker crackled overhead. Welcome to the Marionette Trials. Let the first game begin. The room Ethan found himself in was sterile, a vast white expanse with no doors or windows. Around him, the other contestants stirred, groggy from whatever had been in the syringe. The air was thick with tension. A giant clock on the far wall flickered to life, counting down from 5 minutes. The distorted voice returned. This is your first test. The rules are simple. Remain perfectly still when the music stops. Move and you will be eliminated. A haunting lullaby played over unseen speakers, its melody slow and hypnotic. Ethan felt the hairs on his arms rise as he watched the others, their bodies tense, ready to obey. Then the music stopped. The silence was suffocating. A man near Ethan flinched, his fingers twitching involuntarily. A mechanical whir sounded from above. Without warning, a panel in the ceiling opened, and a thick, steel wire shot down, wrapping around the man's neck. With a sickening crunch, he was hoisted into the air, his limbs jerking as the wire tightened. Blood streamed down his chin before his body went limp. Screams erupted. More people moved in their panic. More wires shot down, dragging the unfortunate into the ceiling, their muffled gurgles drowned by the returning melody. Ethan remained frozen, his breaths shallow. The music played again, and when it stopped, he didn't dare blink. By the time the countdown reached 0, half the room was gone, crimson splatters decorating the once white walls. "Congratulations," the voice boomed. "You've survived the first game." The survivors were led into a dimly lit chamber, where mannequins dressed in ragged clothing lined the walls. Their glass eyes seemed to follow the contestants as they entered. "Welcome to the puppeteer's stage," the voice announced. "For this game, you must control your own strings." As the words settled, the contestants' limbs jerked involuntarily. Ethan gasped as he felt unseen forces pulling at his joints, forcing him into unnatural movements. A masked figure emerged from the shadows, carrying a bundle of wires. He attached them to a contestant's limbs. The man's body convulsed violently before he let out a strangled gasp and collapsed, blood trickling from his mouth. "You must take control," the voice instructed, "or be controlled." The mannequins began to move. The contestants were forced into a grotesque ballet, their limbs jerking and twisting as if controlled by unseen hands. The mannequins joined them, their stiff joints clicking in eerie synchronization. One by one, those who couldn't keep up collapsed, their bodies twitching like broken marionettes. Ethan gritted his teeth, fighting against the invisible strings, his muscles burning as he tried to stay upright. Only a handful remained by the time the music stopped. The mannequins stilled. The survivors gasped for breath, their limbs aching. The last game was simple. One contestant had to kill the other. Ethan stood face to face with a trembling woman, both holding crude, rusted knives. The voice cackled through the speakers. "Only one can leave." Tears streamed down the woman's face. Ethan's grip tightened on the handle. There was no escape. The lights flickered. A final scream echoed through the chamber. Then silence. The doors opened. Ethan stepped into the cold night, his hands stained red. He was free. But at what cost? The Marionette Trials had their winner. The game is over. But at what cost? The winner walks away, but the nightmares will never leave. The ones who lost, forgotten, erased, nothing more than puppets whose strings were cut. But this is just one story. What if there are more games? More victims? More horrors waiting in the shadows? If you made it this far, you're already part of the game. Subscribe to Whispers in the Dark for more terrifying stories. And remember, not every game is meant to be played.